Welcome to the Wayne Bennett Podcast, celebrating West Virginia's people, places, and the culture of Southern Appalachia. Now here's your host, Wayne Bennett.
Welcome to Wayne Bennett's Podcast. I'm your host, Wayne Bennett, and this is episode 151. It's October the 10th, 2024, and it's a brisk fall morning. We send our prayers and condolences out to the people in Florida. They've just gone through the second hurricane, Milton, and we pray that those people are doing okay and recovering. We hope for a quick recovery. Today our guest is the deacon from St. Francis de Sales Church, and I don't know what do they call you, Reverend or Deacon or Harry?
Well, I tell you, there's two ways. Usually Deacon Harry is what everybody calls me at St. Francis. In correspondence, I'm sometimes noted as Reverend Mr. Harry Evans.
I see.
And that's a designation that they would give to a permanent deacon. There's two kinds of deacons in the Catholic Church. A transitional deacon is a man who is going to become a priest. So in his formation from a layman to a transitional deacon to a priest, then that's his path. For us, for me and the gentlemen that have been through the same type of formation, we're called permanent deacons. Now we're ordained just like a priest. And so our ordination is forever. It's not something that can be undone, so to speak. But we are permanently assigned as deacons to assist in the church and to assist the bishop by serving in a parish and serving the people of the parish. So
we'll get into some more of those duties and some of the things that you're involved with. You grew up in the Mankin Avenue area in Beckley, and we've talked about this before, but it's about the old neighborhoods.
Yeah, the old neighborhood.
Like me, you grew up in a neighborhood where there was a lot of kids within 3 or 4 years of your age, either older or younger, and there was plenty of things going on back in the late 50s and early 60s, and I delivered papers over in that area for about 5 years, and I knew most of the people. Everybody took the newspaper in those days, and so I knew most of the people. This morning I wrote a few names down, but let's say we're walking from Vance Drive up Mankin Avenue. Give me some names as we're going up the road there of guys that were close to your age.
Well, probably the closest I was to anybody on Mankin Avenue is right at the very beginning of Mankin Avenue, and that would be the Tirico brothers.
Okay.
Pete and Steve, and we were together for years and still yet have, good relationships. I remember Mike Piles. He was, his father worked for one of the hospitals. There were off on Porter Street, Jeannie Miles, the Pipers, Bobby Piper, Sam Casino. We got down to where my mother. Let me clarify that I've lived in 3 houses on Mankin Avenue.
Okay.
So I know Mankin Avenue very well. I know all the front yards, all the backyards, the whole deal. But down on our end, beside where my mother bought her house, the second house they owned on Mankin, were the Millers. Jeff Miller, you remember Jeff Miller, who has...
Jeff and I graduated together.
Yeah, Jeff had all this information on Woodrow Wilson and Beckley on the internet.
Yeah.
And people still use that as reference. Let's see, friends of also my brother. I had a brother that was a couple years younger than me, so we kind of shared some friends.
What was his name?
His name is Steve.
Steve was a big boy, wasn't he?
He was a big boy, yeah. Steve Evans.
He was playing a little sandlot football.
Yeah, he played some football, and he was friends with like Danny Bailey's brother, David Bailey, and some of the others, Jacksons over on Orchard Avenue and whatnot. But it's funny thinking about naming people that I interacted with on Mankin Avenue. I had friends over on Vine Street. For example, the McMahons, if you recall Brian and Paul McMahon. Well, Paul and I, we were in the same class, and we were very good friends. Stephen Helmsy, who was down on Berkeley Street. He was one, and we were the ones that kind of hung together. But I'm kind of getting off of Mankin Avenue, but I'm expanding my world just a little bit to say that if I moved over onto Orchard, then I'd have to include Gene Petrantazzi. And of course, these guys were a couple years older than us, but we still had relationships and had friends of that nature. I think back, is trying to really reminisce over this, was how the neighborhoods were so cohesive. Everybody knew everybody. You had a lot of families there where the men had experiences with World War II. We were early boomers, essentially. I was born in 52. And it was the old joke, if you got in trouble up the street, there'd be somebody up the street that knew you and knew your dad, and the word would get back and you'd be really in big trouble. But the families would get together, and do things. And it's quite different than it is now.
Some names that I can remember, and you correct me, I know the Somalas lived there for a while.
Somalas lived on the first block. They were on the right-hand or left-hand side of the road coming up, nice brick house. And I do remember the Somalas, but I didn't have much interaction with them.
Yeah, the old man was in the coal business, and he loved me because I delivered the papers early, and he would be taking off about 5 o'clock in the morning, and he always gave me a big tip because I got the paper to him before he left. And of course, I played a little ball with Derek, and you mentioned Bobby Piper, and then, of course, Robert Samala. Ron Samala was the older brother who went to Notre Dame and played on that 62 basketball team at Woodrow that was undefeated, but he died very early. Yeah. He got cancer and passed away, and then J.W. McNish and Wayne McNish.
I skipped right over him because I lived right across the street from their mother after Mr. McNish had passed away and the boys were gone. Uh-huh. His wife, Jim McNish's wife, lived in the house right across the street from us. My third house on Mankin Avenue.
Now, J.W. was 2 years older than me, and he wasn't very big, but he was an outstanding athlete. He lettered in 4 sports, and football, basketball, baseball, and track. And he kind of adopted me a little bit in the 10th grade in track. He actually, seniors would bequeath things to sophomores or juniors when they were graduating, and he left me his track shoes, and he and his wife, he ended up going to Glenville State and graduated there, and then he and his wife worked, I think, in Gilmer County, and he passed away very young. He was a coach at the school, and she was the principal, I think. But great guy. Now there was I don't know whether this was on Mankin or not. There was a guy named Kendall Tomlinson.
Kendall Tomlinson lived right across the street from Tirico's.
Okay.
Directly across the street. Yeah, I do remember.
Now, he was a big radio guy.
Yeah, he was a radio guy.
Yeah, he had, I had a walkie-talkie that would talk to CB radios sometimes if you were on the right channel. And I go over his house sometimes, and he had stuff in the basement, man. I mean, he could shortwave radios. He had everything.
Well, you know what? Now, that's an interesting point that you bring up, because that is one of my hobbies. I've been an amateur radio operator since 1970.
Really?
Back in high school. And I was introduced to CB radio by a Mankin Avenue boy, Skip Cornett. Ward Cornett was his name. Now, he went on to be some PhD theologian. I noticed that he just passed away not too long ago. But anyway, I would say I was probably about 10 years old, and Skip had an old Lafayette CB radio, and I was just enamored with that thing. And I used to go to his house all the time, and we'd talk to people on that CB radio.
It was big time back in those days.
Yeah,
I don't know whether it still is or not.
Well, it's evolved. Technology, radio technology has evolved over a great degree. And in my tenure as an amateur radio operator, we've gone from simple CB radios to digital systems now, and satellites and the whole deal. It's pretty intriguing. And that's been probably my main hobby over time has been amateur radio.
Well, there was a couple older guys, one down on Dorcas Avenue, Red DeVore.
Red DeVore. He was interesting. He worked for the state police.
Yeah.
And if, do you recall Bill Elkin?
Bill Elkin.
Bill Elkin, okay. Bill worked with Red. Red used to tell stories. He came from the Shinston or Clarksburg area, somewhere up north. And he worked for a radio station where they used to do play-by-play on baseball games. And he would relay the play-by-play to the main station to broadcast by Morse code.
Really?
And we always said Red thought in Morse code. He wasn't figuring it out, man. He had it in his head, and he was an amazing guy.
And then there was a guy down in my neighborhood who worked on a lot of those. Bill Smith. I don't know whether
Bill
you knew
Smith.
him.
I recall Bill Smith.
Yeah, he was older, and anytime we had a problem with the radio or anything, you'd take it down to him. He'd fix it, and hardly ever charge you if he anything. But then, of course, I'm going on up the road that I can remember. The Christians, Norman Christian.
Well,
and
we
Kenny.
live. Our house right now on Mankin is right behind the Christian's house.
Okay.
On Wood Street, we were on that corner, and Christian's backyard shares with my backyard. And
David Dunbar.
David Dunbar's on the other corner. He was on the corner of Wood and Mankin on the dead end corner.
His dad was our family doctor, I guess you would say. He had the Dunbar Clinic up there beside Atkinson Supermarket.
Yeah. And
back then, we didn't have any insurance, and I would take out insurance through the school. You'd pay $10 a year or something. Right. But Doc Dunbar was who we always went to if we went to the doctor, unless it was something more serious. I can't leave out Evan Thurman.
Well, Evan Thurman and my brother were very good friends, and Evan lived down near the dead end on the left-hand side, and he and my brother were real tight. Evan
was a devout West Virginia University fan. He went to WVU, and when we named the field up at Park Junior High, Bob Pruitt Stadium,
right.
Evan called me, and we were friends, and he called me. He said, "I'm not talking to you anymore. You named it after a Marshall guy." And now Randy Delp, did he live on?
Delp lived the next house beside Thurman's, one house down.
Okay. And he had a sister, Vicky.
Vicky Delp. She graduated with us.
Very good-looking girl.
Yep.
Randy and Evan both have passed away, haven't they?
Yes.
Yeah, that's. Those are the names that I remember. Of course, some of them people that you mentioned over on Orchard and Dorcas. You can go around Charlie Haywood and all the way around through there. You mentioned Gene Petrantaza. His dad was my first baseball coach, Dido, in the Braves, actually my first coach. And I really had a lot of admiration for him. Now, your dad, he was a supervisor at the landfill?
No, actually, that was me.
Oh, that was you.
That was me. That's a long story. But my father worked for Appalachian Power Company.
Okay.
And right after he got out from the war, from World War II, he was severely injured in the war. He had some very serious back injuries, shrapnel injuries. But anyway, he was a good softball player. And we always joked that the reason AEP hired him was for his softball skills, because, at that time they had these softball teams and they played all over the area. And Dad played softball for AEP, but it was the only job he ever had. He worked for him for, I think about 45 years.
Wow.
And he's been gone now for probably about 15 years now.
What was your mother's maiden name?
Evans, and Evans married an Evans.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Were you guys any kin to the Day and Night Evans?
No, we're not. We're not. I know the Day and Night people well, but we are not related.
Now, you probably answered one of my questions. That your childhood was fairly normal. You were a Cub Scout, got a wolf badge, and all that.
Mrs. Miller next door, Jeff Miller's mother, she was our scoutmaster or Cub master. So, yeah, we had neighborhood kids. It's funny, I've got some photographs of those, that we were lined up with her.
And I guess your dad, being an athlete, got you involved in sports.
I played Little League baseball. I played minor league and, what you want to call Little League, Major League. I was on the Royals on the minor league team, and I was on the Yankees on the upper league team. And my father did coach teams, along with several others. Some come to mind. It's funny, I was trying to think back on some of this. Steve Passel, I believe, was one of the coaches. It was funny you mentioned Evan Thurman. I played midget football, and Evan's father, Delbert, was one of the football coaches for
I'll bet that was
midget
fun.
football. Yeah, he was pretty. He was rough.
Well, you mentioned, I guess you were on the Yankees back when Bill Kelly and some of those guys were, they had, and Steve Passel, he coached the Yankees for several years, and he had a son, Tony. Mm-hmm. And Tony would get mad every once in a while. He had a temper, and he'd walk out during the games and stuff, and it was kind of, but I saw Steve a few years ago at the Y, and I don't know whether he's still alive now.
No, he passed away, and in fact, I did his funeral.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah, he was a good guy. As far as
I thought Mr. Passel was a good man. Yeah, I remember him well, and he was a good coach.
You got it. You mentioned the football. You were in the punt, pass, and kick contest back when you was only about 9 or 10 years old.
Yeah, I remember that well.
Wonder why they quit having that.
I don't know. It's interesting, but I do remember that. I wasn't very good at it, but I do remember competing. And
where was the competition at? Do you remember?
I think it was at the Little League field.
Really?
On field number 1, I believe it was on field number 1, as I recall. Let me think about that just a minute now. That's what I recall, that it was at the Little League field. It could have been at Pruitt or Woodrow's old stadium, but
I remember. I don't think that I ever got past the first round. I think I was in the first round, but never got. I always had a pretty weak. I never was a great kicker or punter or anything like that. But I used to have the finals on TV during some Super Bowl. I think when they first but I haven't even heard anything about that stuff anymore. When you were in Lincoln School, you were actually in a play one time.
I was in a play.
Farewell to Lincoln.
Farewell to Lincoln.
Was that Farewell to Lincoln School?
I think it was a little bit of both. Yeah, I remember Lincoln School pretty well. I mean, I was thinking some of the teachers, just as you mentioned Lincoln, Click. I think Miss Dickerson was the principal at the time, and
which was really unusual, a female. But now there's women principals all over the place. But she was the only female principal that I knew of growing up.
I remember Miss Leary. I think Miss Leary was our first grade teacher. I remember Ruth Brown, Miss Money. I think she was the 6th grade teacher, and others. Some of those lived in the neighborhood. Ruth Brown was aunt of Andy Beshara, and I remember her well because of Andy Beshara, who was another one of my friends. He was down at Raleigh Heights. And his family owned Beshara's baby shop uptown. Yeah.
Now, did you play basketball or anything like that?
You know what? My sports career has been, I've tried a little bit of everything. I did try basketball in junior high, and I just was not that good at it. So I kind of let that go.
When you got to junior high, you went to Beckley Junior High, right. And I think I saw one time that you were on the football team, weren't you?
I did. I tried football the first year also. I was a center.
And you did win an academic award or two, I think.
Well, it's funny. I don't recall that right offhand.
Well, I think I saw your name somewhere.
I will take that as a yes.
Now you only had one brother, no other siblings.
No other siblings, no.
And somewhere along the line, you got interested in cars.
I was always interested in cars.
Okay.
I can go back to my mother always used to say that if I could see a car from a mile away, I could tell her what it was. And this was at a very early age. You was talking about delivering papers. Now, my big source of income was mowing grass, and I did deliver papers in the morning. I had a morning route over on Glen and Dorcas, so I did deliver papers for a number of years, but I spent all my money on slot cars. There were 3 slot car tracks in Beckley. One of them was over close to where the old, it used to be Grady Whitlock Ford. There was a building over there. If you recall, there was a stamp store,
Yeah.
Top Value Stamp or Green Stamps, and there was they put a slot car track in there. And then down at the bottom of the hill where that Scrubby's car wash used to be, where they just tore it down, there was L&B Supermarket. And Jack Litton bought the L&B Supermarket or rented it, and he put a big slot car track in there. So these electric powered slot cars, I spent all my money on slot cars. I was just enamored with those things. I have kept an Excel spreadsheet of all the cars I've had over my life, and I'm ashamed to show it to anybody. But I have drag raced, I have round track raced, I have had some nice hot rod cars and whatnot. And right now I'm without. I have nothing.
I think they had one over top of Harvey Cabinet Company for a while.
There was, in fact, that was the last one that was in the area. Now there's one down at Midway that Tony Greco has. And I've never been in there, and I'm afraid to go because I'm sure that if I go in there, I want to buy something and run the cars. But that was a big deal. When
did you get your first real car?
First real car was a '69 Volkswagen, just a Beetle car, which I hopped up, did engine modifications and this and that. And I used to drag race it out at Grandview Dragway in Grandview. Yeah, they had a Volkswagen class, and I raced the Volkswagen out at Grandview.
I had a cousin, Larry Tucker, he had a Volkswagen. I thought he raced his a little bit too. But, the first car I ever had was a 54 Pontiac, and it didn't last very long. It blew the engine, and it wasn't out of overdriving. It just ready for it to go. But what's your favorite car?
My favorite car, well, the one that my children said that I should never had gotten rid of, is I had a '69 Camaro convertible Super Sport.
Oh, wow.
I bought it off a kid over in Summersville. It was a car that had been reconstructed, and I took it apart and had new parts put in it and painted and engines and everything. And I had that car for about 8 years. But it was a beautiful car. It was dark blue, had the Z28 stripes on it and the stock wheels and 354 speed. It was a fun car. It was I guess my impulse. I had something else. Something else caught my eye, and I was able to sell it for much more than I had in it.
Are you still into collecting cars?
Well, I don't have any collection, and I don't think I've ever had more than maybe 2 at a time. When I had the '69 Camaro, I also had a 1989 IROC Z convertible, and I had both of those at several times. I've had several Corvettes. I had a Shelby Mustang. The last car that I just got rid of was a 328i BMW convertible. I just sold it a couple months ago. I had it for about 3 years. I had a diesel Volkswagen convertible, one of the late Beetles. I had a Camaro, 13 Camaro convertible, SS convertible, things like that. I'm kind of impulsive in my purchase. Like I said, I'd almost be afraid to show anybody that list because it was kind of embarrassing that I had so many different vehicles over time.
I had back in those, did you show cars at?
Yeah, I used to go to the car shows all the time. And in fact, that's where we still get together with Taricos and Petrontazi and Larry Foster and a few others, that we grew up with. And we go to the car show out at the airport and get together and, kick things around. I still had my BMW this year, and I took it and showed it. But it's interesting that is where I heard about your podcast. Was from Pete Tarico. We were talking about things, and he happened to mention that he had been on your podcast. And
Pete was one of the first people that I had on here.
Yeah.
And
I said, "Well, where did you see that? I don't even know what you're talking about." And he told me, and I looked it up, and that was my first exposure to your podcast. Was Pete Tarico.
Well, that's good publicity. Well, Pete and I've been friends for years, and he's got a lot of stories for sure. But speaking of cars, 1969 may not have been one of your best. You know, we're all grown up, and the things you do with cars and stuff. Was that your first ticket that you got when the failure to have your car under control? Or
no, I did actually. I got a ticket when I had my learner's permit. I was stopped down on Valley Drive in front of old Pete and Bob's drive-in. I was with my dad. He was with me, and I got stopped for speeding on Valley Drive. And I remember this was back in the day when you had constables, and it seemed like to me the name Jimmy Large came to mind. I don't know if he was the constable or whatever, but yeah, I got pulled over and got a ticket before I ever had my driver's license. I had, several others, but the one that was most memorable, I did have a Hot Rod 56 Chevrolet, which I sideswiped the car on Russell Street one afternoon, and that got me a nice ticket. I lost the engine in the car, but I ended up putting a larger engine in the car, and I drag raced it a little bit. And
I had a 62 Mercury Comet, and it had I think a 351 engine in it, and I thought it was a hot rod. And back in those days, some of the guys would have names painted on them.
Oh, yeah.
And, there was a guy named Billy Ailiff that used to paint names on people's cars. And
I knew Bill Ailiff well.
He painted on my car "Midnight Mover."
Okay.
That was the old Wilson Pickett song, and so in the neighborhood, of course, I didn't have the money to get all the fancy stuff, but it was a pretty good little rod, and I had baby moons on it and shackles in the back and all that stuff. I was still in high school, and when I go down the road, though, I'd always keep it down to low gear, so make a little noise, and the neighborhood kids would all come running. "Midnight Mover," But it got to a point. But back then, you remember the guy named George Foreman?
Oh yeah. Well,
he had I think a '64 Chevy 2. I think it was a '64. And I loved that car, and I think he'd put a 427 or something in it. And I mean, he would pull up beside of you and rattle your windows.
Oh, yeah.
But all those guys used to drive down around Pete and Bob's and up around Burger Boy.
Well, I was in that loop because I spent a lot of time there. It's funny coming up. My next door neighbor was Zerny Lowe.
Oh yeah.
And of course, Zerny had the 76 station, and that was my first paying job, was working for Zerny. And of course, Zerny had some drag cars, and I used to help him with his drag cars. And that was a magnet for a lot of the local guys that would come by and use the racks and set their cars up. And that's where I got to hanging out with a lot of these guys. Jay Dixon was the neighbor there. He was a couple houses down from Zerny, and Jay had some relations with some other guys that had cars. Tommy Garton was the name that Tommy was a drag racer.
I tried to get Tommy on here, but he wouldn't come. But he was one of the original.
He's in poor health now. I know his daughter, and he's not getting out much now.
He was one of the original dragsters when they used to race in the airport before it was not really legal.
Yeah.
He had a Pontiac. He always drove the Pontiacs because his dad sold Pontiac GTOs.
Yeah, he was tied up with the Pontiac guys. In fact, I think he had one of the first GTOs in town, which ended up in Gene Petrontazi's hands after a couple of years.
Yeah.
But I remember Tommy. He lived in a little garage apartment in the alley behind Orchard Avenue, and he drove this car for a guy in Oak Hill. His name was Kim O'Neill, and it was like a 66 Coronet Hemi, 426 Hemi car, and it was definitely a drag car. And they used to work on that car in that little garage apartment over there in the alley, and I used to go over there and hang out with them too. So,
Kim O'Neill, he had he was a big boy. He was a big boy. Several cars, and he had a joint over there at Oak Hill, Kim's Palace. He ran for several years. But those were also in '69. You and the Tirico brothers got a ticket for disturbing the peace on July the 4th. Do you remember that?
There were probably quite a few tickets that you don't know about that we got. No.
I think it was a $26 fine.
Yeah, I don't recall that on July the 4th.
But
it's a good possibility, yes. We always said, Tarico had a Corvair. They always talked about the Corvairs being dangerous.
Yeah.
And I always joked, I said, we had a few near-death experiences in that Corvair. I mean, those are your stupid years.
Well, I've had my share. Now, when you got out of, when you were in high school, you wrestled. You went out for wrestling.
I did wrestle 1 year. Yes, I did. And it was part of my try something at least once routine,
And you were in the Key Club, too.
I was in the Key Club, yeah. Yeah, my wrestling career, again, it was one of those things that I enjoyed doing it. I liked it. I wasn't very good at it. And in the class that I was in, I had some guys that were much better than me. The one name that always came back to me was Tom Coleman. I think he practiced on me. It was about what it amounted to. But yeah, there were some really good guys in those in the class, and that was in '68. That was the first year that Woodrow. Yeah. First class that went all the way through Woodrow, our class.
Now that was the year I was supposed to be on the team that year, and I broke my ankle playing Sandlot football.
Oh, really?
And before the season started, and I didn't get them. And Tom and I, we call him Chew. We went to grade school together. We went from the first grade on. He was a tough guy. I still talk to him every once in a while. He's down in Georgia.
Yeah, he probably wouldn't remember me, but I remember him.
Now, what about the name Hoopy? Where did that come?
Where'd you get that?
I can't reveal my sources.
That's a good question. I have to give my father credit for that. Back in the Beckley College days, you had these guys that came from out of state to Beckley College to improve their grades, and my dad called them BC Hoopies. Okay, we had a nice basement at my house, and I had a pool table in the basement. And somehow there was a group of them that stayed in that house now that is the hair salon across from what used to be Carolina Supermarket, right there, Dr. Tom Lilly's old office. And because we were delivering papers and I fooled around at Atkinson Supermarket and all that, I got to know these guys. And so after a while, they started coming to our house to shoot pool. And so my dad, he kind of related to me that I was one of the Hoopies. Anytime you see Pete Tarico or Steve or any of those guys, well, that's who I am. That's my name. Hoop. They call me Hoop. That's a funny story, but
well, that's I had a nickname for a while in high school called Hombre.
Okay.
And it all started. My name is Aubrey Wayne Bennett, right. And I always went by Wayne because my dad's name was Aubrey, my son's name's Aubrey, my grandson's name. Okay. But anyway, I always went by Wayne. But the first week of school, they would start out Aubrey Bennett, and I said, "Well, I go by Wayne." Right. Well, I had this one teacher who was a phys ed teacher, and he couldn't pronounce anybody's name right anyway, and he called the roll and it Hombre Bennett. And I said, "It's Aubrey, but I go by Wayne. He'd call me Wayne." He wouldn't say Hombre, but every time we had phys ed, he would call me Hombre Bennett. So these guys started calling me Hombre. Well, I didn't mind it too bad, but wasn't much longer after that a movie came out with Paul Newman and it called Hombre, and it was Hombre means man, so I really liked the deal. But very rarely now, every once in a while, somebody will call me that, but it's not too many of them around. But now what after you graduated in 1970, what did you do?
Well, I had a short stint with a forester. Bob Keeling was his name. He had his own business. He worked for J.P. Hamer Lumber Company, and he was a registered forester. And when I was trying to decide what I wanted to do, I knew I wanted to go to college, or at least I thought I did. I took college prep courses in Woodrow Wilson, and I did okay. I decided I'd go into forestry. So I went to WVU for a year in the forestry program. And of course, when you go in your freshman year, you don't actually get into the forestry program. You know, you have so many preparatory classes. But that was my first attempt to come up with a career. I have to back up and say that my wife, Marcia, and I dated from our junior year all through high school and beyond. And when I went to college, we thought, and we were smarter than everybody else, we thought it was a good idea if we get married. Okay, so I was married halfway through the first semester of my first year of college. And our plan was to kind of get things together and stay in college and stay at WVU. But needless to say, from a standpoint of finances and other issues, we didn't follow through with that. So after my first year of WVU, I came back to Beckley and went to work, and we, started our family. So I kind of, I was trying to think to say that my career path has been a little wandering, so to speak, maybe a career path of opportunity more so than a plan. But WVU was my first attempt to set my course.
Now, how did you end up being a supervisor at the landfill?
At the landfill. When I came back from WVU, I had worked for Dick Jones down at Southern Industrial Marketers. It's down there at Mabscott. It's a machine shop. We did mining repair. And that is where I learned to do machine tools and weld and so on and so forth. I picked up a lot of good vocational skills down there at Dick Jones. I used to haul the trash out to the landfill from the Southern Industrial Marketers, and I got to know the present superintendent. His name was Roy Bennett, and he offered me a job. He said, I give you a job in a scale house. And I thought, well, I just looking for something a little different. And I said, okay, that sounds good. The pay was better, and I didn't have to get dirty and nasty every day, and I started out as the scale master at the Raleigh County landfill. And this is back when it first opened up. About 6 months after I was hired, Mr. Bennett decided he'd had enough and he quit. And this was, the landfill was managed by the Southern West Virginia Regional Health Council. It was kind of a government organization, and they managed landfills in different counties. But anyway, they asked me if I would stand in for Mr. Bennett since they needed to, find someone else to take over. And quite frankly, they never did. And I stayed with them for about 2 years as the superintendent of the landfill. Now, if you think back in that time, that was the time when the county initiated this green box system where they put the boxes out in the county and they had the big trucks with the forks and all that stuff. And we also, we established a landfill at Kennard in Fayette County. And we also established a landfill at Wyoming County, just outside of Pineville. If you go into Pineville and on top where Bradford's got all their old rock quarry up in there, well, that was another place.
The green boxes were a great idea, but then people started setting them on fire and then piling up furniture and everything in the world. But the idea was good, but it just didn't work out.
Well, as the superintendent, you were also the substitute truck driver. Oh. And so I made quite a few routes with the big trucks, and I've come back home with my tail on fire several times. And
you got married early. You've had 4 children.
4 children,
and 2 boys and 2 girls, or
3 boys and a girl. Yeah, the last was a girl, Sarah.
Your wife had been a Catholic all her life. You had been a Presbyterian, right?
My mom and dad were Presbyterian.
So you got into the Catholic religion, I guess. And when did you start thinking about doing more than just a Catholic member of the church?
Well, that transition, I go back to tell my story. You want to go back a little bit. We weren't aware that there was, at least I wasn't, and there were quite a few of us that went to public school that were not aware that there was a Catholic school. And back in the day when we had the YMCA at the Memorial Building, in the 9th grade, we started seeing these girls that we had never seen before. They started coming to the YMCA, and we're asking, well, gosh, where'd these girls come from? And there were Catholic girls. We didn't know there was such a thing as Catholic girls. And it was one of those, well, gee, I've got to have one of those. So, I know that's kind of a funny twist to it, but I was not interested in faith at all. I was typical adolescent, young adult, car crazy, drag racer, da-da-da-da-da. And it wasn't until about 1980, which we had been married almost 10 years, that I finally decided that I needed to bring my family together, so to speak, and actually join the church. So I always considered myself as a disinterested Presbyterian. I was baptized in the Presbyterian church. Most of my formation as a young person was through the Presbyterian church. My parents were Presbyterian and they were active in the church, but I was really not interested. So in 1980, I decided that I should do something better. So I took the classes that I needed to take in order to join the church, per se, to receive the sacraments of the church. And that kind of was my kickoff. I had a very, I want to use the term, significant experience at a retreat that I went to that I was not interested in going to, that really made me see that I needed to do better. And it's been a long journey. Now, I've been ordained for almost 9 years now, but in that time from 1980 up until 2016, I just got involved in things in the church that were opportunities to serve, that were not things that you needed to be ordained for, so to speak. So I taught Christian formation to youth for a number of years. I was a reader at masses for a number of years. I did outreach, Knights of Columbus, different things like that, which kind of led to the point where I got to a point where I thought I really wanted to do more, and the diaconate was an option for men to become more involved in the church and to fulfill a notion of service to the church and to make a lifelong commitment in that service. So I always said, if you were to draw a graph of my faith development, the curve would be very low and smooth, but it has been somewhat consistent over those years.
Briefly, tell me what the difference between a Presbyterian and a Catholic is.
Well, the Presbyterians essentially they believe in what's known as predestination, and I think that that's the main tenet of their belief, is that God already knows where you're going to go at the end. And that if you are one of the elect, as they call it, then, you serve the church in a way that is beneficial. Catholicism doesn't believe in, I always like to use the term one and done. It's a lifelong conversion. And, there's some conflict in the ideas of, is it faith or is it good works? And, if you ever have any encounters with people that aren't Catholic and maybe a fundamentalist viewpoint, they look at Catholics and say, well, Catholics believe that it's your good works that get you to heaven. Okay. But Scripture even tells us that it's faith that gets us to heaven. It's faith that justifies us for that sanctification, and that it's that faith that results in good works. So it's not the other way around. It's not the good works get you faith. It's the faith is manifested in good works. I never really paid that much attention to Presbyterian theology. Yeah. And I think that that's one thing that really helped me to become Catholic, because I really didn't have anything to unlearn, because I really didn't care. Yeah. I mean, is that kind of...
Well, that's kind of the way. Kind of goes back to the adolescent type thing. Sure. Let's go back to adolescent. What kind of music did you listen to in high school?
Oh, I was all about the 70s, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and the Beach Boys, and things like that. When I was in WVU, of course, Vietnam War was going along. Woodstock happened that year. There's a lot of music that came out of Woodstock. A lot of the art, Jimi Hendrix, those kind of things. Of course, my wife, she's no Jimi Hendrix fan, but I like to play Hendrix. And
now your wife is. I remember seeing a couple things that you were involved with. One was a school-based clinics or something, or
we did oppose at the time school-based clinics. That's interesting. How did that work? That was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was in the 80s.
The idea on school-based clinics was that these school-based clinics were going to hand out contraceptives to children.
Yeah.
And there was a number of people. In fact, I teamed up with a gentleman who I would term as a fundamentalist, was involved with Greater Beckley Christian Schools now, whatever that church is. I remember his name was Glenn Talent. He's a pastor somewhere, and I remember Glenn really well. But, the concern was that it was going to teach children some moral values that we didn't think needed to be in the school. We needed to leave that at home.
You also wrote an article in the paper, letter to the editor, about abortion, and one of the local attorneys, Bob Baker, kind of attacked you a little bit and said you were a Puritan.
Oh yeah.
I guess that's not a good thing necessarily, but some people wouldn't mind.
Depends on how you look at it.
Yeah. And but your wife went on and became the director, I guess, of Birthright.
Director of Birthright, yes.
Still is.
She still is. Birthright is still in business. The original intent of Birthright was to help women to have their babies, to be a friend to women. They are not a judgmental organization. That they don't proselytize. They don't push any religion. They just simply say, we're here. If you have a crisis, we're here. We'll listen to you. We'll try to help you get help. If you need information, if you need some resources or things, they have a clothing closet for maternity clothes and baby clothes, and they provide things like diapers and formula and things like that to people who are just starting out with babies that, they have a need. And I have to say that over the period, she's been doing that now for 40 years.
Wow.
40 years. The stigma of crisis pregnancy is different now than it used to be. It's more accepted to say that if you have an unwanted pregnancy and you decide to keep that child, that it's not really like it was 40 years ago. It's not as big a crisis as it used to be, because that's the way we had termed the organization as a crisis pregnancy center. Well, the notion of crisis pregnancy has diminished over time. Mm-hmm. And they don't have as many people that use their services. But, again, I can go back to say that it is a very wonderful ministry in essence. Now, they've had not just Catholics to support it, but they have churches and people, just individuals from all over the county and out of the county that have supported Birthright over the years. But she has had a good supply of volunteers over time that have been very good with the women, and they have never had any financial issues. They've had a wonderful landlord. They've got a place over on Vance Drive, 400 North Vance Drive, that they've had for a number of years.
Schaefer House.
Yeah, I believe it is.
Reverend Schaefer used to
belonged to the Harvey family that owned the cabinet shop down there. That's who owns it now. But and abortion has always been a sensitive issue. Catholics believe in respect for life from conception to natural death. And, you really have to take a stand somewhere. I was thinking back when you talked about that idea, that article that I wrote. And I think I recall that I may have referenced the idea that the Vietnam War took a turn in regard to the public's conception of what the war was like because of the pictures that they saw in the news. We got to see the Vietnam War in real time. So those pictures of war and those descriptions of what was going on really turned the tide in regard to the people's support of the war in Vietnam. And I think the topic was the idea that someone was kind of playing down the notions. Well, what about the pictures of aborted babies? If you saw pictures of aborted babies, would you still have the mindset, is abortion the right thing to do?
Yeah.
And, my wife will tell you, and statistics will show, there's a lot of people out there that would just love to adopt children. But, the mindset today is abortion's quick and easy, and why would we want to give our child to someone else? Let's just kill it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way we see it.
When the weekend that you went in 1980, I think you called that the Cursillo or
Cursillo, yeah, Cursillo.
And then becoming a deacon, do they call it diaconate or what?
Diaconate.
Diaconate.
Diaconate, yes.
The Catholic Church, like any large organization, I mean, they've taken hits, and and I've always had a real interest in the history of the Catholic Church. I've always thought it was amazing how they've come over the centuries, but then you got things like that kind of feeds into the mystique, like the Da Vinci Code and things like that. Anytime you're a large organization, you're going to have criticism and you're going to have issues, I guess. Have you ever visited the Vatican? Have you ever been over there?
Oh, yeah.
Have you?
Yeah, I've been there. I was there several years ago. My wife and I went, and it's just, of course, Rome is a beautiful place, and of course, there's a tremendous amount of history there, obviously. All of the basilicas in the Vatican, and we actually got to sit in on one of the Pope's audiences. This would have been Benedict XVI, and it was funny that I was on the front row of the congregation there, and he came by us as close as you and I are. There was a lady standing in front of me with a baby, and he wanted to, kiss the baby. So one of his attendants came over and got the baby and took the baby over for him to kiss it. Well, I had my camera behind it, okay? So I took the picture of him kissing the baby, and you're just, like I say, as close as you are right now. The next day, the Vatican newspaper came out with a picture of him kissing that baby, and I think my picture was better than theirs. But no, I mean, there's so much history there. My daughter and I went to the Holy Land last year. We may have taken some of the last trips to Israel that have been taken since all this trouble went along. And, the Holy Land was an eye-opener for me too. But most of the sites that you go to in the Holy Land are more or less memorials of an event or memorials of a place that they may not be exactly sure that this is where it happened. But there are, memorials for that. I was more, I don't want to use the word impressed, but more interested in the political situation actually over there, because to see a lot of the holy sites in Israel, you have to go into the West Bank. And to see how the West Bank was so much different from the Israeli side, and how the relationships between the people, and how in essence you can tell over the news and the way things have been how strained the relationships were, in that regard. Yeah. But we had a Palestinian Christian for our guide, and he was a wonderful guide. He knew everything about everything that we visited. He knew his way around. He knew how to get to places that nobody else knew how to get to, and it was just a wonderful experience. But now that, everything that's been going on over there, it's really kind of scary to think that we were just there not too long ago, and how significant that is.
You've mentioned that your career path and your life has had some unconventional moves. Is there anything you do different?
Do different? No, really not. I mean, I've gained a lot of experience in a lot of different things. I use that term. I know a lot of things that most people don't want to know. And that comes from my experiences in my career path. I mean, if you think about it, if you start out working in a gas station, I became a mechanic, I became good at mechanical things. I went from the gas station to the machine shop. I went from the machine shop to the landfill. I went from the landfill to Walker Machinery, a Caterpillar dealer, as a heavy equipment mechanic. I worked 10 years for Vasilio and Grogan as a heavy equipment mechanic. I went from Vasilio and Grogan to Massey Energy. I started out at Massey Energy in a preparation plant as a welder mechanic. I ended up at Massey as the manager of quality assurance for the entire Route 3 process. And then I went from there to a company and did electrical engineering and programming of automation systems for coal preparation plants. And then I managed the electrical division of the company.
Wow.
So, my career path has been mostly a matter of opportunity. Yeah. Some of them not pleasant opportunities. A great example of when I got involved with Massey, I was a preparation plant foreman. I was also a licensed mine electrician, which that was an opportunity that I was given at Massey. My very good friend, who was the laboratory manager, who was in charge of quality assurance, committed suicide. And I was the only one at the time at the property that knew anything about the laboratory. So it was one of those kind of like the guy at the landfill. I'm the scale guy. He says, well, I'm leaving now. You can be the superintendent. And here I am. I'm the superintendent. Well, my friend committed suicide. I was the only one that knew the lab operations. So they said, would you be the quality assurance manager? And I thought, well, I don't know much about it, but I'll try it. I went to University of Kentucky and took courses in lab management and coal testing and all this. And I ended up being the one that did all the coal blending for everything that left Route 3, which was a big, big deal. I mean, it was a big deal. I helped develop the very first, well, not the very first, but the second ISO 9000 quality system for a coal operation in the United States.
Wow.
That was one of my projects while I was with Massey. So yeah, it's it's kind of like when I left Massey. I had it made at Massey. I'd been there 17 years. I was coming up on full retirement and full medical benefits, and my friend.
I thought you retired from Massey.
Well, I have a small retirement, but no, I had a friend call me that I worked with at Massey at age 47. He said, I'm starting a business. I need somebody to help me with my business. His business was to design automation and electrical systems for coal preparation plants, and he was going into business for himself. And I thought, if I don't do this, I'm probably going to be sorry. So I left my 17-year stint at Massey, gave up my future medical benefits and my future full retirement, and went to work for this guy. And he started a business, and he was very successful, and it led to something really good for me. I got to travel a lot. I was all over the world, all over the United States. We built coal preparation plants in China and Mongolia and Australia and just all over the world.
Wow, that's and you ended up back on Mankin Avenue.
And I ended up back on Mankin Avenue as a permanent deacon.
Well, tell me just quickly, what can you do as a deacon?
Well,
duties.
There are just very few things that a deacon can do that a layman can't do. Probably we're considered, if you use the terms ordinary and extraordinary, we are considered the ordinary minister of distributing communion to the people. Now, if we don't have an ordinary minister like a deacon, then we can use lay people, they would be called extraordinary ministers. But anyway, we can read the gospel at Mass, which is very special, and we can also preach. It's interesting thinking about what I do the most is I do participate in assisting the priest at Mass. But I also, once I became a deacon, I became a very public person to the people in the congregation. I've been involved, in people's lives in a number of different ways, in good ways. In baptisms, I do baptisms. in not so good ways, I do a lot of funeral work. I never ever thought that I would be on first name basis with all the funeral directors. It's just something that you would have never even imagined in your wildest dream that that's what I would end up doing in my life. But it's been a wonderful thing because it's given me a vocation in my retirement. And it had also given me a vocation to be part of something much bigger than myself, you know. What a blessing in that. It's not always easy. Not everybody you deal with is, not every day's a happy day, but you know, you become involved in people's lives and try to assist them on their journey.
That's amazing.
So as a deacon, I am blessed. It's funny that when I started my formation, I thought really that I was too old to even start, because formation for the diaconate for ordination is 5 years. So I went to classes for 5 years in order to be ordained. A lot of classes that were graduate level. You know, I'd been out of school. I took a lot of classes at night, and from extensions, I probably got 100 hours of college credits. I don't have a degree, but I've got the credits where I took classes when I was at Massey and doing a lot of this quality work, just like the classes at UK for the lab and things like that. I took classes at night and took classes at extension from Concord, statistics and accounting and ethics and, you know, all kinds of things that I thought kind of involved the type of work I was doing. But
Now,
then
you can't do mass or confessions.
right. Only the priest can, I use the term, only the priest can consecrate the bread and wine into the body of Christ. Now, I don't know how much you understand about Catholicism in that regard, but that's the thing that makes Catholics unique, is Catholics believe, or they should believe, that the consecrated bread and wine is the actual body and blood of Christ. Mm-hmm. If you go back to John chapter 6, it's very explicit. I don't know how people can ignore that particular part of Scripture and in essence adhere to everything else. But Jesus says, "This is my body and this is my blood." He doesn't say this is a representation. This is something like this is a you know. But anyway, to get back to that, only the priest can do that. Only the priest can hear confessions. Most everything else we can do. If you're sick, we have a sacrament called the anointing of the sick, and it is actually an anointing. A lot of people call it last rites, but it's actually to help the person get better. The priest does that too. It's biblical in regard to its effect and its act. That would be the main thing. So you look at the Catholic Church, we have 7 sacraments. We have baptism, which most all Christian churches have. We have confirmation. Confirmation is a strengthening of the Holy Spirit. That is what we call a sacrament. We have the Eucharist. Now, the Eucharist is the consecrated body and blood of Christ. Those are what we call our sacraments of initiation: baptism, confirmation, Eucharist. We have 2 other sacraments of healing. We have confession. We call it sacrament of reconciliation. A lot of people call it confession. And then we also have the anointing of the sick. So confession is for your spiritual side. Anointing of the sick is for your physical side. Okay? Then the last 2 sacraments of 7 are holy orders, which is for ordained ministry, bishops, priests, deacons, and matrimony. You see, Christ thought marriage, you know, between a man and a woman was of such importance that the church considers it as a sacrament. It is a sign that's instituted by Christ that brings us grace. And grace is what it's all about. It's, all of these things confer grace. You get the grace of baptism. You get the grace of the Holy Spirit. You get the grace of Jesus Christ's body and blood. You get the graces of the healing of confession. You get the graces of the healing of the anointing. You get the graces of ordination and also the graces of matrimony.
Wow.
Grace, 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 grace.
I was going to ask you what you had on your bucket list, but you've been a lot of places.
Well, I do have a bucket list. I'm an aviation nut too.
Oh, really?
Yes, I love aviation.
You got a pilot's license?
I do not have a pilot's license. I'm without. But I never could figure a real practical reason to have one. You hear a lot of these guys. I have friends that have gotten their certificates, and it's the old, well, gee, it's a great way to spend a lot of money and not really get anything out of it.
There's a lot of my friends that's had a pilot license I wouldn't fly with.
Oh, really?
I don't think.
No, and I've taken, over time, we've gone to a lot of different air shows and air museums. One of my high points, we have a cousin that lives out in Tucson, Arizona, and we got to go to the big boneyard out there at Davis-Monthan where they mothball all the aircraft and see all these expensive machines, wrapped up in plastic. And we got to go to there's a great air museum there in Tucson also that we got to go to, the Pima Air Museum. I've been to Oshkosh, to AirVenture up in Wisconsin, the biggest air show in the world.
Yeah.
Different things like that. And then I do have one bucket list item I haven't been able to fulfill yet, is I want to see the Aurora Borealis.
You want to see what?
I want to see Aurora, Northern Lights. That's what I want to see. And I've got this plan that someday.
You go to Alaska to do that?
Someday I'm going to jump on a plane and go to Fairbanks when the sunspot cycle's hot, and I'm going to go see the Aurora. There's
one of my favorite authors. He's dead now, but Lee Maynard, and I've met him and been to several of his workshops, and he's not a world famous author, but he's pretty noted. But he wrote a book, and the story was about this guy that takes off on a motorcycle and goes to Alaska. He wants to see that,
Yeah.
And it tells the story of his experiences. Well, Deacon Harry, I appreciate you coming by, man. I've enjoyed our talk.
Me too. I have too. To be honest with you, I was quite anxious over this.
I thought you might be, and that's one of the reasons why we like to sit at the kitchen table, and
this is good.
And then we can reminisce, and it's been a great experience. And is there anything else you'd like to share with us? Or?
No, I'm good. I think I've probably said enough. Again, I really do appreciate you having me on, and I've taken the time to listen to quite a few of your casts. I listened the other day about the one on death and dying. And that interested me, being a deacon, to say, what did he have to say about death and dying? And it was really neat, the idea that you're able to introduce something like that to young people. Because I don't think young people have any concept of the future, in essence, not just death and dying, but just the future in
I was
itself.
only 27 years old, 26, and I learned a lot during that time myself. But it was a great experience for me, and I wish that it would have continued after I left, but it didn't happen. Well, we're going to, you're welcome to come back, because there's more things that we can talk about.
Well, I appreciate that again.
We'll leave that open.
I had one other thought I thought was kind of funny, was you did an interview with James Sears. James Sears brought up the issue of marbles. And that used to be the big thing at Lincoln School, was marbles.
Absolutely.
We had that big flat dirt area behind the asphalt behind the school, and that was the thing. When you broke for recess, you're out there digging your lines and loading up with marbles. And I remember marbles.
Steve Licklider was a good marble shooter, and it was. That was one of them other things that I wasn't great at. I'd take a sack of marbles and put them in a sock and go to school, and we would play for marbles.
Yeah.
And then I'd come home with about half of what I had when I took. Again, you're welcome to come back anytime. I appreciate you coming, and we'll leave with this. This is something that I read, and it said, describes you. You wrote this. And it said, I'm just old Harry, still crazy about Marcia and cars, and I'm looking forward to eternity. And that's a good one to end. Right. Anybody else out there that would like to be on our podcast, just hit me up at awbennett50@gmail.com, and we'll get you on here. Until next time, remember, if you're not dead yet, you're not done yet. And God bless you.